Okay, so welcome to the Changing Gears workshop. This is about the art of shifting attention. And that seems to resonate with people, even though they kind of go, okay, what? Shifting attention, doesn't that happen already? It happens automatically. Of course it does. So when every moment as we experience life, we give attention to something, that's pretty much happening automatically, right? It's something that we don't really think about. What grabs our attention, how we focus our attention. The problem is that sometimes we get patterns in the way we give attention that sometimes lead to a whole lot of problems. So for instance, if you're an entrepreneur and you're starting up a new company, or you're thinking about taking on 2 more side hustles, then finding a way to balance the need to have your focused attention to become productive and to really function at a high level can become at odds with keeping some other balance in your life. So I work with people all the time who are high-functioning human beings. I mean, they are go-getters. They create. And I can identify with them. A big part of my life is wanting to produce things, to help people to do things. Sometimes people in the helping professions also can just be go-getters trying to make a difference in the world. But unfortunately, the longer we stay in that mode of high productivity, often the more we find ourselves dealing with things like burnout, compassion fatigue, finding ourselves having more relationship problems. You know, we really underestimate the damage that happens to people because of compassion fatigue or burnout. Because at the point that your focus, your attention has become so fixated and stuck that you can't shift into another mode to be able to relax, to relate, to do things that are not that, the more likely we end up making poor decisions, finding ourselves in relationship issues and conflict that otherwise wouldn't be there. And poor choices that we make often end up running along the lines of destructive patterns of addictions and other destructive things that we do in our relationships. So how do we balance the need to be productive and do what we want, which is one of the great gifts of the human consciousness, of human psyche, our capacity to hold and focus our attention in a way that allows us to accomplish things. How do we do that without having that focus become a fixation? Now, in order to talk about this, what I want to do is take you into the wonderful world of what some might call a theory of motivation. So when you think about it, when you think about motivation, what is it that creates that motivation? What are the components of motivation? You know, if I were going to be a motivational speaker, what would I have to draw on to create motivation in you to do something different? For me, it's a number of things, but a couple of things that most people don't normally think about. So let's take, for example, the idea that motivation is emotional. And most of the time I can spell, so we'll try to keep it, brief. What is it about motivation that's emotional? What of it is logical? What of it is really about having a goal? So when I think of motivation, I think mostly about it being about emotion and imagery. So if you see someone who's highly motivated, they're experiencing some emotional response that is their guiding emotion, and they are following some sense of an image of what they want to do, what they want to create, how they want to operate in the world, whatever it is. The combination of emotion and imagery are what we're going to explore just for a couple of minutes. Because if we get something new into our understanding of motivation, then we have a whole lot better chance at being able to make the kinds of shifts that we want to be able to make when things are becoming really, really stuck. And when we find ourselves moving towards that burnout, compassion fatigue, or when we find ourselves having trouble being in, coming off of this like work, and then wanting to shift gears to be with family, to be with loved ones, to be with somebody in a different way. So, the first thing I want to do is I want to explore emotion. So when we think about emotion, a lot of times what people immediately go to are particular feelings, like sadness or fear or anger. But there are some other ways to look at that. Sylvan Tompkins, when he studied the faces of babies back in the 60s, 50s, 60s, 70s, what he found with high-speed photography was that the emotions that we all think of are actually present in babies, and that there are 9, and they are more like reflexes. So in a baby, when you see the baby cry or get angry or express fear, they're not particularly thinking like adults do. They don't have the imagery component yet developed in their minds. And so what's happening there is something that's much more biological and reflexive, and that's what we call affect. So when we begin to think about the emotional component of our motivation, which is what is directing our attention, in order to find a way to talk about shifting our attention, how do we have the art of that? Then to learn about these affects is important. Why? Because affects are what direct our attention. They direct attention and they flavor attention. So for instance, right now, if what I'm saying to you is curious, stimulating in some way, then it's probably triggering your interest affect. The interest, excitement affect was one that Sylvan Tompkins saw on the faces of all babies. And it's the tracking, looking, listening, tuned in, and if it gets really good, then there's that excitement that you see on the face of the baby, right? So, how many times today has your focus and your attention been motivated by interest, excitement? Maybe right now it is. But if, for instance, something were to happen where, let's say in the middle of watching this video or sitting here in this conference room, you began to think, I should have gone to the bathroom before I came in here, or before I started watching this video. Well, what will happen is before the thought, there will be a little moment where biological signals will trigger some distress. So, our attention is then motivated by distress. Have you ever been in a situation where you couldn't leave and you needed to go? And the more you thought about needing to go, the more distressed you felt. And then you get into the whole thing of like, oh my gosh, I'll never get out of here. And so then we're shifting to another affect, not just the distress that's triggered naturally by, I need to go, but now I'm into fear, right? What if I have to get up in the middle of this funeral or this situation? So, the motivating emotion is important. Why? Because if I can understand something of that automatic system that goes on in me all the time, and the affects that are involved in directing my attention, then I have a chance at being able to change in a time where I'm feeling too stuck. I can begin to shift in a different way. So real quickly, before we move on to imagery, I want to give you the 9 affects. When Sylvan Tompkins looked at the faces of babies, he saw 2 positive affects. Interest, excitement is one, and that's on a range from kind of low to high. And the other was enjoyment, joy. So these were the only 2 facially displayed emotional components, these biological components we call affects, that showed up on the faces of babies. The interest and then the enjoyment. There was one neutral affect that didn't seem to feel good or bad or be rewarding or punishing. It was startle, just the startle response. Think about that. How is your startle response? Some people have very low startle responses. Other people, really big ones. And when you have a really big one, sometimes that means that you then have further scripts with those. So, you know, if you're someone who startles easily, other people may find that funny. And then they may want to do it to you over and over and over again. And so I've worked with plenty of people who went through adolescence in high school. They went through adolescence in high school, and they had friends who would make fun of them for their startle response and enjoy setting them off. And so what did they experience now as adults? When they get startled, they feel shame, embarrassment, humiliation. So, interest, excitement, enjoyment, joy, 2 positives. Startle is a neutral, naturally, but it then can become kind of scripted as bringing up other feelings, depending on how life has treated us. And then there are 6 ways that we have within us biologically to not feel good. There's distress, that's when the baby cries. There's anger, that's when usually somebody doesn't take care of whatever the baby's crying about, and pretty soon the baby's flipped over to a more intense affect. And then there's fear. All babies just have the same facial expression with fear. It's eyes wide open, mouth open, pale skin. And then there are 3 more that most of us don't think of as natural to the body. There's disgust, which is you see the baby take in food and then they go bleh. That's rejection after sampling. But then there's one that Tompkins found that he distinguished from disgust, that he called dismell. And dismell is when the baby turns up the nose to food. There's this wrinkling of the nose, there's a turning away and drawing back. Dismell is rejection before sampling. Now, what I want to suggest to you is that those may not seem like they're really important motivational tools, but both of those, dismell and disgust, we think evolved in human beings in order to protect us from toxic and poisonous things, from rotting food or those kind of things. So imagine, you know, you didn't have that. If you didn't have dismell, you'd be drinking that spoiled milk that's been sitting in your refrigerator for 6 months, instead of opening it and going, ooh, no. One of the things that's really important to recognize, though, about these 2, dismell and disgust, is that they can become stuck patterns within us, fixations, and to have a fixated affective script around dismell can create a life that is always rejecting things before sampling. Another reason why, if we can become conscious enough of what's happening within us, we can take charge in ways that we couldn't before. We can begin to shift our attention even though our automatic response might have become scripted to be one that we wouldn't really like to have. The last of the 9 affects is one that often people find hard to grasp. It's shame, humiliation. We tend to not want to acknowledge this as an actual part of our psyches, but think about it this way. You don't have to teach a baby how to cry, right? nor do you have to teach a baby how to blush. It is natural to young children to have a moment where what felt good or whatever was being exciting becomes impeded, and then there's a drop of the head, a kind of deflation, and there's the blush. When that happens, we feel a little confused, and there's a moment of not thinking too clearly. It's as if our whole body wants us to disengage and notice it. So, we could go on for a long time describing the very different ways that all of us have become scripted over our lifetimes with these 9 affects. But the important thing for this little workshop is just to recognize these are the building blocks of our motivation. What Tompkins found was it is the affect that plays the biggest role in our motivation. So think about it. What you're doing right now is motivated by one of those 9 affects. Is it interest? Is it something else? You know, many people find themselves motivated from childhood to just be good, to prove their effectiveness, to show that they can be productive, to not be, maybe a better way to say it is to not be seen as defective or to not be seen as lesser than. And so the sibling rivalries and the competitions of our childhoods often lead us to having a way of patterned motivation emotionally that looks like fear, and it's fear of shame. I work with people all the time who are shifting. They're learning to shift out of a childhood pattern of fixation on performing in order to avoid what is the fear of embarrassment or humiliation. Now, that's one way to be motivated. Maybe you might become the CEO of a company, or you might become the top of your field, motivated mostly out of a fear of shame or a fear of humiliation. I work hard in order to keep that from happening. If I'm not working hard, then, and I'm not being successful, I begin to feel the anxiousness of impending embarrassment. What I want to suggest is that affective script, though part of all of us at some level, may not be the best way to live our lives. I mean, if I were going to choose, I would want to shift from consistently being motivated from the fear of shame to being motivated more out of my interest, excitement, more out of creating enjoyment and joy. So whether I'm working on some corporate project or I'm working on some way to help heal people and care for people, if my efforts in doing that are motivated more out of the positive affects of what I love, what I enjoy, how I get excited, what excites me, then I'm more likely to find myself with a more exciting, enjoyable life. If I'm motivated more out of fear of shame or anger or distress, those things can become patterns that are fixated. And by fixated, what I mean by that is they're repetitive. And over again, I'm having the same thoughts, the same feelings repetitively. So when I think of the word fixation, I want to separate that from the word focus. How much I am fixated is how much I have nothing else to balance. Focus is more about I can give my attention, but I can then let that shift, both in terms of what my engagement with it is and also with what my emotional motivation is. So the emotions that are motivating us into these high levels of focus we're capable of as human beings that become so productive and creative, they're awesome. But how do we allow for there to be this flexibility, affective plasticity? That's what we think of. So I want to pause for a moment, and then I want to allow you to have a few minutes to just process this. Think about this. What are the dominant emotions involved in what you do from day to day? And what I want to also recognize is that those dominant emotions can have to do also with different emotions depending on whether I'm at work, and whether I'm working independently or collaboratively, or whether I'm at home, and whether I'm with family or friends or my lover. If I'm focused on these different scenarios, where is the shift in my own affective motivation, my emotional dynamic that is powering and focusing my attention? So take a few minutes and just kind of reflect. And where do you see your own emotional dynamics in your work, and whether when you're working independently or with other people? Where do you see your own emotional dynamics when it comes to your relationships at home with family, friends, your lover? How are those fueled in different ways? Take a moment to think about that, and we'll be right back and look at imagery. So 3 ways that I want to suggest we can practice regaining some plasticity and flexibility to our focus and take charge of what is often just a fixated, automated way of being. To change gears, the first way I want to invite you to practice shifting is through what I call sensory-focused meditation. Now, sensory-focused meditation is just what it says. I focus on my senses. Now, maybe you've done meditation, maybe you're a pro in meditation, maybe you teach meditation, I don't know. But for many people, just the word meditation scares them, or it doesn't seem interesting. Why would I spend my time not being stimulated and instead trying to be still? Well, I hope what I've already said in this little video workshop is enough to convince you that maybe there's a reason, maybe there's a good reason to practice that. And sensory-focused meditation is a great place to start. What I want you to do is, and you can do this without seeing me right now, and just listen to my voice. Try closing your eyes. Take a deep breath. Now notice as you do that, that immediately sometimes other thoughts will pop into your mind. Other images, memories, goals, just commentary, criticism, whatever it is that jumps into your mind, see if you can just welcome it and let it go, and bring all of your attention, every bit of your focus, to your breathing. It's as if the only thing you are is a breather, just for these moments. Now normally, I would want to do this for a longer period of time, but because we are doing a little training, I'm just going to introduce you to each of these and then let you practice them on your own. Keep your attention just on your breathing. And now I want you to give attention also, as you give attention to your breathing, give attention also to looking into the back of your eyelids. So you're looking at the back of your eyelids. In fact, try looking at one eyelid and take a deep breath in and exhale. And then shift to the other eyelid and take a deep breath in and exhale. And try going back and forth between eyelids, just for a moment. Giving all of your attention to breathing and looking. And see if you can give an equal amount of attention to both at the same time. You can do it. It's like breathing into your eyes. Rather than being fixated on just one sensation, try bringing the two together equally in your awareness so that you're looking and breathing is one. Now, try seeing if you can allow sound to be also equally in your attention, along with the looking and the breathing. Practice that for just a moment, letting all the sounds around you flow together with your breath as if they were one. Looking, breathing, listening. Letting each of those sensory experiences receive equal attention. That's the goal of the way I teach sensory-focused meditation. Why is this helpful? It's helpful because even physically, what we begin to do with our senses is begin to de-fixate rather than focus. It's a powerful tool for shifting gears. But I want to move fairly quickly, and I think you can practice that on your own. If not, I also have on iTunes a sensory-focused meditation that you can download that's 50 minutes long. It has some music by Daniel Katsuk and me guiding you. So that's a resource for you, but I think you can do most of this on your own. I want to move on to the imagery-focused meditation. Imagery-focused meditation is really about being able to tune in to what are my images of the past and of the future. And so a lot of people do guided imagery meditations, and I also do that. In fact, you will also find online that Daniel Katsuk and I have created a hour-long guided imagery journey that you can download. It's called Stalking the Root. But just for these moments, I want to mention that the problem that we tend to have with fixated imagery is that we believe that what has happened in the past that we carry memories of is real and true and absolute. And a deeper exploration of imagery quickly reveals that it is only a snapshot of the experience taken from a single angle with very limited field of vision. So being able to go into those images that sometimes keep us stuck and keep us from being able to be what we want to be and where we want to be and how we want to be can be really helpful. So if you've got an image from the past or a memory, a scene, a situation that was traumatic or harmful or over which you felt an overwhelming sense of emotion, and if that image in your memory is continuing to guide you to be a particular way or be fixated on particular things, it is possible to go into past imagery and repaint that, bring other people into it, build a new image on top of that image that provides you with a greater sense of what you need. An example would be someone who has had a traumatic injury and who carries a great deal of fear about their physical safety, and therefore becomes fixated in a way that's always limiting their life to not fully living. It's possible to actually go into the imagery of the memory and to redo it and practice that new image, creating a greater sense of safety in the present moment. It's also important that we can look at the imagery that we have of where we're going, What do you want? Where do you see yourself headed? And to be able to ask questions of that, because those images are also a big part of our motivation and our day-to-day attention. So shifting gears can happen by simply evaluating and weighing out the imagery that we have that we're projecting as the future us. What would it be like to not have that image? If that's the guiding image, what would it be like to not have it? What would it be like to explore a little bit of where I got that image? And so, one way to do that is to become still and to just think about, where do you want to go? What is it you're trying to get to? What are you trying to accomplish? Where do you want to be? Picture it. Just picture it. And in a meditative process of just paying attention, see what happens. Maybe you discover something about where you got that image. Who gave it to you? Who are you trying to be like? Who are you trying to copy or outdo? Who are you competing with? These are all good questions for looking at the imagery that I'm carrying as a future experience, the goal, and to be able to be consciously choosing whether or not that's what I want. And the third tool that I have for shifting gears is one that I've had a lot of personal experience with in the last few months and have found incredibly profound for me. So much of our lives is overstimulated. We are the most stimulated human beings that have ever lived on the planet, and digital devices have created an overstimulation of the human species. So we're plugged into screens so much that thinking about not being plugged in, for some people, actually brings up anxiety or what are basically the symptoms of withdrawal, right? I mean, I have seen teenagers have a greater sense of depression, upset, suicidal ideation coming off of being grounded from their digital devices than I have with sometimes people who are addicted to meth. What is it about that that is problematic? Well, if affect and motivation are very important, so my motivation is highly directed by my affect, then digital devices provide continual stimulation of the interest affect. And like a meth user that I once talked to, I have heard adolescents and adults talk about how not having their device to stimulate their continual interest makes the rest of the world feel flat. I have this, and it makes everything exciting all the time, but without it, life seems flat. So this third path that I'm suggesting to you is a way of changing gears, is what I call environmentally focused meditation. And it's very different. We walk into the world. You can be in the middle of a city, you can go to a park, you can find a grove of trees. For me recently, it was a grove of trees, pear trees, right around the parking lot of my office. And so I began just paying attention. The most important piece to this is paying attention. Paying full attention to what is, not to what gets stirred around in my head. So rather than having my mind wander or being off in my own images, what I'm doing is focusing my attention on being present, fully present with the world around me. And so it's the giving of attention, and then it's about giving attention to relationship. So what is the relationship I have right now with this? How do I relate to it? How does it relate to me? It might be a squirrel or a bird or a lizard or a tree or a rock or a river or a pond, but being in that sense of relatedness is one way to bring ourselves out of our kind of myopic, stuck patterns of idiosyncrasy and begin to allow for there to be a focus for some period of time every day where I am giving all of my focus to the interactive and interdependent nature of my life. Now, giving attention in that way brings out in us a whole different set of values and balancing the experience of our lives through looking at the moment, here and now, in my experience of the environment, can create some powerful shifts. So I don't think there's much else to have to tell you about that other than creating a sense of that relatedness and focus on how we are communicating with that which is all around us. And what are we receiving and what are we sending? That's the key. And in my experience of doing this meditation, I have found that I have developed relationships with all kinds of little creatures, birds, squirrels, lizards, who knows what's next. But there's a groundedness that happens through that sense of relatedness that I think we find in no other way. So the three paths that I've laid out for you can provide ways for you to take charge, for you to begin to shift out of the fixations that we often find ourselves stuck in, automatically repeating the same kinds of fixations, and instead to begin to relax into times where we can leave our creative fixations or our emotionally driven fixations that can have mostly to do with fear and shame, to move more toward a way of practicing living with interest, excitement, enjoyment, and creating and living more from those. For more information about all of this work, you can check out my website, cgaby, that's cgaby.com. And you'll also find links there to other resources. So thanks for watching, and I hope this has been helpful. Take care.
And